He's saying when you get killed every day, it's like dying every day, you don't have any feeling anymore. You're just in constant state of stress.
Just a few days ago, this Iranian asylum seeker, speaking to us from a detention centre through a translator, learnt the news. He'd be forced on a plane to Rwanda, thought to be this one, tonight, landing more than 4,000 miles away from the family member, a British citizen, he came here to join. This morning, he hoped a last-minute injunction would save him. An hour after our interview, he was put into solitary confinement. It had not.
He said he believes in God, and he believes that God's going to protect him. And it's a shame that the normal people couldn't help him,
He'll join 6 others on a flight with 200 seats bound for Kigali. The human faces, or rather voices, of the government's new asylum policy.
Now under a huge amount of attack, and not least from lawyers who are finding a way to unpick. And I love lawyers. I mean, many of the people around this table are lawyers.
The government frames it as a war of attrition with lefty lawyers, and this, the latest battle, it has won. All asylum seekers arriving by lorry or boat are at risk of being sent to Rwanda for processing. Those that are successful in their claims will stay there with up to 5 years of support. The Home Secretary, Priti Patel, insists it'll act as a deterrent. The Rwandan government doesn't see why it should be.
We do not consider living in Rwanda a punishment. We don't think anyone should. I mean, you're here. I don't know what your impression is and what impression you had before you came here. But we're doing our best to provide a conducive environment for Rwandans to develop and for anyone else who comes to live here with us.
Human rights groups and the UN Refugee Agency claim the policy is unlawful and lacks safeguarding. The Home Office's own risk assessment identifies concerns with the country's human rights record around dissent to its regime and free speech. But the £120 million deal struck with the Rwandan government 2 months ago was defended staunchly by both countries today.
What opponents of the policy have to say is, well, what is your alternative? What is your alternative to people being shipped across the channel in very frail, unseaworthy dinghies, risking their lives and undermining the rule of law? What's your alternative? We think it's a sensible partnership we've set up with Rwanda. Yes, it may take a while to get working properly, but it doesn't mean we're not going to keep going.
Joining the chorus of those calling for an alternative, the Archbishop of Canterbury and 21 bishops, who today in a joint open letter called it an immoral policy that shames Britain.
He hopes they wake up, and he's happy if it's this only 5 people going to be the victim of this silly decision. He's happy to be that victim if there's nobody else going.
Later this week, the government will reportedly start an advertising blitz, targeting asylum seekers with messages like these. The numbers of those crossing by small boat hasn't dipped since the policy's announcement. More than double have arrived, 138 people yesterday alone. Meanwhile, a plane with fewer than 10 people on board will set off in the opposite direction tonight.
Amelia Jane reporting. Well, Jane Deeth is at the Boscombe Down airfield in Wiltshire, where the plane believed to be taking the asylum seekers to Rwanda is on standby. Jane.
Yes, Matt. If you look just over my shoulder, tucked behind a mound there, you should just make out the back of a privileged plane. As you say, we believe this is the aircraft that the UK government has chartered to kickstart its Rwanda plan, sending asylum seekers, it says, came to the UK illegally, to Kigali to apply for asylum and a new life there. It's been sitting some way from the runway all day while 4 men made last-minute challenges in the courts to avoid being put on an aircraft to Rwanda. All those 4 bids failed, so we understand that 7 people would be on the aircraft if it takes off tonight, including the Iranian man in Amelia's report. And we understand also that it may take off sometime around 9:30 to 10:30 tonight for the 9-hour flight to Kigali. Privilege is an airline that says it is chartered usually by sports tours, by VIPs, but also its website says by government deportation agencies. A plane, privileged plane, could seat hundreds but an aircraft that takes off tonight, we think, would have just 7 people on board. So it will be an expensive and slow start to the Rwanda relocation scheme. But the government's been making clear all day that for the UK government, this is about putting down a marker. If this plane takes off, then it is a way of saying to the country that its plan with Rwanda can and will get off the ground.
Jane Deeth, thank you very much indeed. Well, one of the controversies that have dogged the Rwandan government in recent years is the treatment of Paul Rusesabagina.
This is a 4-star hotel, not a refugee camp. I have no means to protect these people.
His story got the Hollywood treatment in the widely acclaimed film Hotel Rwanda, which showed his role in protecting guests at the hotel that he managed from militia groups who killed hundreds of thousands during the Rwandan genocide. But Mr. Rusesabagina later became a fierce critic of the long-standing government of Paul Kagame, while the film's account of his behavior was challenged in Rwanda itself. Mr. Rusesabagina was put on trial in Rwanda after he claims he was effectively kidnapped in Dubai. He's now in jail on terrorism-related charges, serving a 25-year sentence. His daughter, Karine Kanimba, joins us now from Belgium. Thank you very much for coming on the programme. I don't know if you managed to hear the piece at the top of the programme, but it had a clip of a Rwandan minister saying that living in Rwanda as a refugee is not a punishment. And we know that our Home Secretary, Priti Patel, when she first announced the policy, was highlighting the fact that Rwanda has an excellent record when it comes to accommodating refugees, as well as a very dynamic economy. What do you say to those claims?
I believe that this is completely wrong. And I can testify to this because my father, Paul Rusesabagina, was kidnapped across international borders and brought to Rwanda in violation of international laws. Then he was tortured and made to face a sham trial, and then he was convicted to 25 years in prison. That is because my father had been advocating for the lives of the Rwandan people who are being abused, whose human rights are being abused by the Rwandan dictatorship, a dictatorship that has been in power for almost 30 years. They kidnapped him to silence him because he was speaking out and exposing the abuses of this government.
The government, of course, say that he was convicted on charges related to terrorism. Your response to that?
They're completely fabricated charges. And in fact, there was a trial that presented zero credible evidence. If they had legit evidence against him, they would not have needed to kidnap him. They would have used already established legal means to bring him to Rwanda, but they decided to kidnap and torture him. That is because they have absolutely nothing against my father. My father is innocent. He's just a human rights critic who has used the platform of Hotel Rwanda that he received through Hotel Rwanda to bring attention from the international community on the abuses being perpetrated by Paul Kagame and his government.
So first as vice president and then as president, Paul Kagame has been in power for almost, I think, 28 years. And of course, your father's case is not the only case of human rights violations and indeed critics of the government allegedly being assassinated in Rwanda and outside Rwanda. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, as you can tell, I'm wearing a T-shirt that says "Free Rusesabagina," but my father is not the only political prisoner in Rwanda. Just a few months ago, the Rwandan government actually arrested and jailed several journalists just because they were doing their job. They were reporting on what the government is doing. And so they were arrested and they have been silenced and receiving reports that they are currently being tortured as well in prison. And Rwanda also, there are many refugees, Rwandan refugees across the world. The fact that they are preferring to live under the rain without food, without schools for their children in refugee camps instead of going back to Rwanda is a telling factor and should, I hope, give some clarity to the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary on their decision to send vulnerable people to a country that is killing its own people.
Right. So as far as you're concerned, Rwanda is the kind of country that you don't go to as a refugee, but you flee from in order to have a safer and better life.
Absolutely. And actually, my family fled Rwanda many years ago as well, because there was an assassination attempt against my father, just because he was also being recognized for having saved lives during the Rwandan genocide. So as a refugee myself, I can tell you that I would not go back to Rwanda. And in fact, I would probably be jailed if I stepped foot there, just because I am speaking to you today. So no, people do not go to Rwanda. They flee Rwanda because of the dictatorship, the brutal dictatorship.
Karine Kanimba, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you very much.